mostly AI is about sunshine and flowers and productivity and raising human capability, but there's some challenging questions associated with AI as well, which we're going to talk about today. So I want to raise a hands around the room. How many of you have, or are pretty certain you have, fake applicants in your candidate pools?
Oh my God.
Cool. Keep the hands raised. I'm just curious. How many of you have actually identified a candidate who was not who they said they were at some point in the hiring process, like committing candidate fraud? Ooh. How many of you have committed some sort of fraud in the last year or so? No, okay. If you didn't have your hand up, maybe hopefully not the last one, but like the first couple, you might just have missed it. I'm Teddy, I'm one of the co-founders here at BrightHire. I'm joined by an amazing set of panelists who have a really valuable set of perspectives on this topic. A really important one. Our mission is to give everyone the hiring experience they deserve. We often think about that from a candidate perspective, delivering a great experience to candidates. But hiring managers and recruiters they don't deserve to be on the receiving end of a candidate who isn't who they said they were. And it seems like that problem is becoming more prevalent in the market. So why don't we do a round of intros down the panel, and we're going to talk about the changing landscape of identity, fraud, trust in the context of hiring. Soups, I'll start with you, and we can work our way back this way.
Perfect. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, the BrightHire team. I'm Soups. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sardine. We are a financial services fraud prevention company. We work with financial services companies like banks, large payment processors, fintechs, and marketplaces, helping them prevent fraud, be it identity fraud or payment fraud, as well as financial crime, which is AML. And I'm here to provide perspective on what we are seeing in the industry when it comes to applicant fraud as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. And then Brendan Ittelson, I'm the Chief Ecosystem Officer at Zoom. Everyone asks what that is. That means that I'm responsible for how Zoom interconnects with all the tools and services to make it a connected experience. I've been with the company for a number of years in a number of roles, and that included building our trust and safety organization in the early days of Zoom. And my background is in cybersecurity and identity management from my time in the federal government prior to Zoom. So excited about this conversation.
Hi everyone, I'm Josh Fattal. I'm an attorney at Morrison Foerster, colloquially known as MoFo. I'm in our... I just have to get that in.
You need some levity in the conversation.
Exactly. I'm in our privacy, data security, and AI practice. I'm working with BrightHire and other companies in this space for a number of years. But just building on what Mars said earlier, I may be transitioning to divorce law very soon.
Let's start outside of the talent acquisition industry. So, Soups, we were just talking about financial fraud is a $1 trillion annual problem. It's where the stakes are highest and where the incentives are the highest for bad actors. What are you seeing on the front lines with respect to how AI is changing what financial fraud looks like?
Yeah, 100%. Could I go over just the slides? Yeah? Perfect. Amazing. I brought a few slides along just to give you guys an overview of what we see in the industry. I'll take a quick 2 minutes if you don't mind.
Great.
Yeah, perfect. So first and foremost, right? So I would say with AI, it won't be any surprise to you that creating identities online has become a lot easier. I'll just give you a few examples. Nowadays with AI, you can even generate a passport where the hologram itself looks very realistic, like a real passport, right? And this is a deep fake. This is 12 months ago. The head motion, as you can see, is a little bit jittery, right? This is as of 6 months ago. Now the head motion has gotten a lot smoother. And now this is actually very recent. In this case, on the left-hand side is my chief of staff. And we did this live on TV for CBS News LA. And this is the anchor. And we actually also converted the anchor into Taylor Swift live on TV. And now this video here, I'm actually pretending. It's the real me on the right-hand side. I'm pretending to be one of my customers on the left-hand side. And I'm actually going through a Zoom call, right? And I'm just showcasing here how we can actually detect these things in real time, right? So this is what Sardine does as a technology. We would detect how these video streams are being injected back, right? So not all is lost. It's still possible to prevent a lot of these things. But I thought I'll set the stage by just showcasing how easy the problem has become, right?
So Brendan, you led trust and safety for Zoom. So you had a front row seat. I guess back in COVID, it was like Zoom bombing. Somebody just showing up to a Zoom room who didn't belong there. But synthetic media, AI, deepfakes, like, are we seeing a linear progression of the challenge when it comes to trust and identity? Or have we seen a step change in the last 12 or 6 months in terms of what's capable and how prevalent this is across the platform?
I mean, the speed of innovation in this area is remarkable right now. And we are seeing it just increase so quickly. And it's moved from just a niche item that, well-funded actors could use to something that is now mainstream, accessible by most individuals to really orchestrate items here. And I think that's the item, is when you think about that real-time nature with high availability, it's definitely a concern at the speed that it's going at. But at the same time, being from the trust and safety side, this sort of fraud is something that we have seen these cycles. It's just a new tool that's being used. So it's this question of how are we investing in trust and constantly evolving into the changing threat model that's out there to look at where the space is moving and how people are using this new technology but following the same sort of patterns.
Is there any sort of, I don't know if you can share specific data, but like a holistic, like how often is this happening? What's the prevalence of either fake identities or synthetic information kind of on the platform? I know there's like trillions of minutes of interviews or of meetings captured on Zoom every year. Do we have a sense for like how many of those involve some sort of identity challenge?
So it's a wide thing, and what we normally look at is like overall industry signals. And so I think about like one of the reports I was reading recently from the World Economic Forum, where they were saying synthetic media is growing at a rate of, I think they said about 1,200% a year-over-year growth. And you look at how easy it is to access. I think one of the latest things in terms of creating the media that I heard is with just 3 seconds of audio from someone, you can get a 85% match to simulating their voice. Think about it, 3 seconds of someone's audio, and you can almost mirror them where it will pass. So it's a rapidly evolving space at this point.
So Josh, what are people panicked about? Like when they come to you, and they're like, crap, what questions are they asking? What topics are they worried about? Yeah, what are they coming to you kind of, hair on fire about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the types of questions we're getting has changed a lot over the last few years. If you zoom a couple of years back, a lot of the privacy and AI laws in this space were new. They had just come out. The questions were, how do we comply? What are the key requirements? And do we need a policy, right? Do we need an acceptable use policy once the first LLMs were rolled out? What should be in that policy? Now I think we're seeing a lot more complicated questions that are leading to that panic. And the most concerning question I think a lot of companies have is how do we keep up, right? How do we keep up with the change in technology that we're trying to implement a governance mechanism over? And how do we keep up with the change in regulations? We track the various AI-related laws and bills that are in consideration in the United States. And depending on your count, there's either 600 or up to 1,000 of those. So how do you possibly build governance mechanisms that account for all of those and are able to keep up with the change in technology, which the bills themselves can't keep up with? And I think the types of questions now are really, how do we keep up generally, but also when it comes to high risk and sensitive use cases, right? So if we're going to use data for fraud detection, if we're going to collect the signal to be able to catch these fraudulent candidates, what do all these laws mean for us, and how do we quickly implement compliance mechanisms at scale?
Subes, I want to come back to you, this topic of kind of keeping up. You showed examples of how the technology has advanced. Can you give like a very practical example of like what the bad actors are actually doing, like a sophisticated, orchestrated attack that simply just wouldn't have been possible 12 or 18 months ago, but now is?
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things I always go back to is that Warren Buffett has said that with the advent of AI, the biggest growth industry of all time is going to be fraud, right? So if we lost $1 trillion worldwide to fraud and scams last year, you can imagine this problem is only going to get worse. What actually honestly keeps me up at night is, we are very close to having a truly agentic fraud system, which is, today fraudsters have to go on the dark web and buy stolen identities, and then they come back and pretend to be that person, buy stolen cards, pretend to be that person. A lot of that stuff, they have tools, but still there's a human in the loop between all of those steps. I think very soon we'll have a fully agentic fraud system where, agent goes, buys credit cards on the dark web, pretends to be someone else, applies for jobs at various Fortune 500s, or banks to steal like trade secret or know-how, or to actually steal money, right? And that is what keeps me up at night, because then fraud detection companies like us, right, where we are preparing then is that we want to have like a fully automated defense system as well. Because today when there's a fraud attack, I'm waking up humans, my human data scientists, human fraud ops to actually detect the pattern. But we're very close to actually having a fully automated defense mechanism as well. My motto is I don't need to wake up a human ever. I want to have AI battling AI. Right?
Brennan, you described how somebody can get your voice print in like 3 seconds. And you think about some of the signals that were traditionally defenses against fraud, biometrics or IP address, et cetera. Like, is when you have agentic fraudsters at work, are those still viable defenses? Like, what still works and what is not working now?
So I think there's a wide range of signals, and this is where, when I really think about this trust and safety area, it's sort of a spy versus spy, and it's constantly evolving, but it's grounded in how are we establishing trust with the changing technology landscape. So we're constantly looking at what are those trust signals and what are things that we can implement with Zoom, and then what can we do as an ecosystem, working with partners and having them on our platform to measure those different trust signals and look at what the risk profiles of our different customers are, because trust for each one of us is probably different and for our business and what we're trying to do. So what are the trust signals that make sense to me for my business and the risk that I'm worried about? And so is that I really want to know the candidate and their sort of identity lineage, or do I just really care to know that this is a human? And is there a proof of humanness at the other end? And so that's where we're looking at, are what are those things and how do we make this and make it a scalable option? We hear of folks in the field that are doing things like asking folks to just turn around on video. That's not a scalable approach. So how can we use technology and other signals and evolve with the signals as the AI is advancing?
Yeah. Are you seeing anything, Brendan, across the platform that has surprised you in terms of, again, like the risk profiles, the signals that folks need to be able to pick up on?
So I think it's constantly changing, but we keep on seeing general themes. Folks are looking at financial fraud. They're looking at identity fraud, but that starts to go into what are the profiles and what are the fraud scenarios that we're running. I think a lot of the conversation that we've had so far right now is candidate fraud, but we're also seeing the opposite, recruiter fraud.
Yeah.
And so you start to think, are folks representing your brand to steal identities? And so that's where it's really interesting of how do we start to look at those signals? How do we get that trust on both sides of the relationship for folks that don't know one another and help prevent those use cases?
Yeah. So I want to come back to you. You talked about automated offense from fraudsters, but then automated defense. What does that actually mean? What does an automated defensive system look and feel like? What are the parameters? As I think about the folks in the room, probably there's a lot of manual work being done right now from a candidate fraud perspective. If we're going to try to automate some of this work, what does that look like on the front lines?
Yeah, I actually have an example because I wanted to share what we are doing. I hope this is the right one. Yep. It'll be hard to see it, perhaps, but I'll just try and describe it. So we are very proud partners of BrightHire. We use them for our applicant screening and interview process as well. And the reason we started thinking about the space of candidate fraud was because we sell KYC, know your customer services, to banks and fintechs. As part of KYC, we are already like asking consumers to verify their identities, like present a passport, national ID card, driver license with a video selfie, right? So then we started seeing that some of our crypto clients who use us for KYC, they started coming to us. The CISOs started coming to us saying, hey, I'm seeing North Korean candidates actually try to get in to get a job so that they can steal my cold wallet, right? So that is how we sort of became aware of this problem, let's say, a year ago. And we are also, because we are in the financial fraud space, we are acutely aware that maybe fraudsters actually want to get a job at Sardine as well. So what I'm showing you here now is that we've started dog fooding our own fraud systems against our own applicant pool, right? So this video, it's a little small, but what it is showing is it is actually an agentic query. It's an agentic system, which is looking at all candidates who applied at Sardine in the last 1 month. And it is actually, it can be scheduled. It runs like every day. And then look at all the candidates who've applied, and it'll tell you which of these candidates have a high risk score. We look for patterns such as location is the most important one. Is there the candidate pretending to be in the US, but they're using a VPN, and the true location is all the way in India, right? So that is one common signal. The phone number that they gave, or the phone location, again, pretending to be in the US, but the phone number is in Brazil, right? And we are looking for cues like that. And what we are finding is that for all the heads of talent out there, like you spend a lot of time going through applications. My team, they've come back and said they don't have to look at as many applications anymore. Like they've cut that down by like upwards of 50+%. But to make the long story short, automation, AI defense system is something which will look for like all the telltale signs of fraudulent applications, and then gives you a score in real time so that you can act on it without actually spending too much time with that candidate, right?
So Josh, for a company like Sardine or many others, I think, that are trying to put these new signals together, we've thought about GDPR or CCPA in the context of gaining candidate consent and the use of AI broadly. But like, what policy frameworks, what regulatory frameworks actually hold weight in a context like that, when we're trying to really push the boundaries on developing kind of automated defenses against candidate fraud?
Yeah, I mean, the real challenge from the legal perspective here is the more automated the tools that you're implementing are, and the less human involvement there is, the more regulated that tool is from a legal perspective. So it's a fundamental challenge, I think, in how we think about rolling these things out. So there are many different frameworks. I'm not going to touch on all of them. It could take a while. But if you're doing something that obtains a facial recognition, a voice print, a face print, right, then you're capturing a biometric. And there are laws, some of which have private rights of action, which means they can be, you can bring a lawsuit as an individual candidate. And some of those laws are heavily enforced and heavily litigated. And so if you are doing any type of biometrics, you need to think about where am I doing it and what are the laws in that space and how do I get appropriate consent to make sure that I'm not sued if a candidate is rejected on the basis of that collection. There also are increasingly growing regulations in the area called automated decision-making, which means you're using an automated technology to make a decision. What's interesting in these laws is they don't typically really define decision. So a decision can be hiring someone or not hiring them, but it could also mean moving them off the list because you think they're a fake candidate. If you're subject to these laws, then you have a whole additional set of obligations that come into play. And at the same time, there are federal and state discrimination laws, right? And so if you are implementing an automated tool that may not intentionally, but inadvertently wind up rejecting certain candidates for fraud detection purposes or otherwise that trigger protected class characterizations, then you're subject to these anti-discrimination laws as well. So there are multiple varying levels of legal framework. And so from the advice would be, think carefully about what is your actual goal, and then how are you designing the tool to collect as little data, but as effectively as possible to meet that goal so you can comply with the legal regime at the same time.
A lot of these frameworks are relatively newly established. Like, how black and white are they? How much gray area is there? Like, how much case law is there actually to rely on to be certain that one approach versus another is on the right side versus the wrong side? How murky is this landscape today?
Yeah, it's incredibly murky is the short answer, which makes our job challenging because clients come to us for advice and I have to tell them in 2 weeks it actually may be different, right? One of the major new laws in this space in the US is the Colorado AI Act. That's the first real state law that looks kind of like the EU model, a comprehensive AI regulatory law. There's a ton of lobbying to change that law. It takes effect in June. But over the next 2 weeks, the Colorado legislature is considering completely revising it. So what do you do as a company in that situation? And there are also lawsuits that come on top of these laws that can take all kinds of interesting theories. One lawsuit that we're tracking against a company called Eightfold, some of you may have seen it, is arguing that the collection of third-party data to inform hiring decisions and determinations basically constitutes a consumer report. So therefore, the collection and use of that information should trigger the same obligations as if you were applying for a mortgage, for example. It's a novel legal theory. We don't know how it's going to pan out, but that the existence of these theories changes the risk calculus in some cases.
So Josh, could I ask a follow-up to that?
Sure.
What are the third-party data that they are contesting in this case? What would classify as a third-party data?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some of it is not clear what exactly they collect. But it would be even something like collecting data from LinkedIn. Anything that's a third party that is not provided by the candidate directly under the text of the statute, which is a 1970s law. So this is an old law that's being used for a new purpose. But you could argue if it's not directly provided by the candidate, it is third party information. And then the compilation of that data is the creation of a consumer report.
So I'm curious if you have a perspective on this, actually. I imagine the regulatory and legal framework in the context of the financial industry may be a little more well-established than it is in a candidate context. How are you and your customers navigating that legal and regulatory landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the case of financial services industry, we follow a law called Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA. It was created around, it's considered as a law created around the time when Patriot Act was created after 9/11. What it states is that so long as banks are using the data provided by consumers or businesses for the purposes of fighting fraud, it's okay, and it's also okay to actually share it in a consortium, right? So that if one bank is seeing somebody pretending to be me, then that bank can alert other banks that, hey, there's somebody trying to pretend to be Soups, right? Where it gets gray is credit, right? Credit is protected. So credit underwriting is an area where if you decline an application, a credit card application or a loan application to a customer, then you have to provide adverse, I mixed that term.
Adverse action.
Adverse action, yes. Which means that consumer should be able to call a particular phone number to contest it, right? But so long as you don't use any of these data points, let's say LinkedIn or phone number or email, so long as you don't use it for underwriting and you say this was strictly for fraud purposes that I used it, it's okay, right?
And that's interesting because Josh, you were saying that in the hiring context, there isn't yet any sort of carve out for collecting information specifically to prevent fraud.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, under the current Colorado laws, and one example that's supposed to take effect, next month, if you use an automated tool for fraud detection and there is a facial recognition or biometric component, you're just as much subject to that law as if you were doing it for a hiring purpose unrelated to fraud.
Brendan, how you own Trust and Safety, now you own Ecosystem. Like, how is the ecosystem of Zoom customers and partners thinking about this? Is it a collaborative effort? Is everybody kind of doing their own thing? Is there knowledge sharing? Like, how is the ecosystem checking this?
So there's a bit of everything there, and that's what I love about the ecosystem is there's a lot of folks thinking about this and going, how can we address this? Because it is a complex problem with a lot of different levels. So we have teams internally that are focused purely on features for trust and safety of the platform, bringing that natively into Zoom, but we realize we can't do it alone. So we're involved in many consortiums to get signals across the high-tech industry to go, how can we start identifying this on the platform? But then it's also about having an open platform so that other companies can come in, connect into our platform, and offer amazing services to do that. So you talked about LinkedIn earlier. We have something going on right now where your LinkedIn profile could show up on your Zoom profile, and if you validated your LinkedIn ID, that coming through. We've got the orb over there, which is World ID that can do proof of humanness. So that's another example. And then we have folks looking at the deepfake detection, for example. And when you think about deepfake detection, the ways that folks are looking at that, from different trust signals to analyzing video to the audio and what's out there, it's fascinating. And that's what I'm so excited about, is there's a lot of great minds thinking about how to do this and thinking about the different risk profiles for these different audiences so that folks can really have the best of breed solution for what they're trying to do.
Soups, in the financial industry, is there a consortium approach to this problem, knowledge sharing, collaboration? I'm curious if there's lessons that we might learn as an industry from what's being done in the financial services sector.
No, 100% there is actually. And this is a great collection of people over here. And I think collectively we could build something super powerful together where we eliminate candidate fraud. And in fact, from the financial services industry, we at Sardine, across the banks and fintechs that we work with, we have a pretty large consortium where if the same device was used to apply for an account at a bank, and I see that same device being used at other banks, I can actually share that information across banks and say, at Bank A, this device was used to commit fraud and therefore be alerted. Similarly, think about email or phone number. In fact, for banks and fintechs, we even get down to the selfie. So if the same selfie was being used during KYC, and we know it's confirmed fraud, then barring certain states where like the biometric laws come into place, we can actually say that if this same selfie appears again, then we should decline the application, right? Yeah.
Josh, you talked about in our prep conversation the flip side of we have to be mindful of what we put in place to prevent fraud, but we also need to be mindful of the risks that we have if we end up being deceived. Can you talk a little bit about, we talked about like North Korean workers getting IT jobs. If you hire one of them, what happens?
Yeah, I mean, the North Korean case is particularly interesting because there are a whole range of potential legal outcomes that may not be so obvious when you first think about them. So obviously, if you have someone in your system, right, that is not who they say they are, and employed by a foreign adversary country, that is a security incident where you want to have typically a third party come in, analyze what data do they have access to, what systems did they have access to, and were they doing anything nefarious, right? And many times in the North Korea case, they're just there to make money, right? They're not necessarily putting in a backdoor, but there are cases where they have. The Department of Justice has brought indictments against some of these groups for stealing sensitive government data, and there's been cases where they've sold, very sensitive proprietary data. So you have to deal with the range of security implications of that access and also privacy implications. Because if the data that they had access to related to an individual, you may have breach notification obligations under various US state laws. And then if you had paid them, right, as a North Korean worker, you actually could be in violations of sanctions laws because we are not allowed, in the US to pay North Korea, right, and funnel money to North Korea. And so inadvertently, you've now sponsored kind of North Korean actors. So you're stuck with a range of issues aside from the reputational issues, of course, which can come up if this happens repeatedly at your company. I mean, what's very interesting in the AI liability space in particular is there are generally two roles that a lot of these laws set out for companies. You can be either the deployer, it's called, or the developer. The developer is the company that created, trained the model, and then the deployer is the entity that's using that model. And both have sort of different allocations of responsibility. But if you are the deployer and you're using a model in a way that is a little bit different than how the developer did, you were as much on the hook as if you had developed that model yourself.
So there's risks on both sides. There's risks of taking action, being aligned with the regulatory landscape. There's certainly risk of not doing that and then being under sanctions law. How are your customers thinking about weighing those risks and balancing them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a careful balancing act where no one wants to be caught flat-footed, and there's some risk involved. Like we were talking about how all these laws are so new. A lot of it comes to contract negotiation. We help many companies negotiate, AI-specific terms where they're trying to put protections in place for their company that are also palatable to the counterparty. And it's a brave new world because this is not like these contracts have been negotiated for years. They're new. And so I can't tell you where the market is because it's still being formed.
I want to open this up to the room here because there were a lot of hands for folks who had caught fake applicants or were dealing with this. I'm sure there's actually probably a lot of interesting practices, maybe some manual, some automated across the room. So I'd love to open it for questions for the panel, but also if you have experience where you've instituted something that's helped in this regard and you want to share it. Again, I think we're all in this one together, and sharing best practices across the room could be very valuable. So yeah, we'll take hands around the room. I saw Eric up here and then in the back.
Curious, with the level of sophistication from the bad actors, do you envision a world in which more analog-based environments like in-person ID verification become more of the reality and safeguards?
I definitely think so, right? Which is where I think at least even applying it to the candidate fraud use case, right? Like the simplest way or the quickest way to detect if somebody is pretending to be somewhere else is to just ask them to show up to your office, right? And in fact, we did have a scenario like that. So one candidate who pretended to be in the US, my head of HR just asked him to go meet my co-founder in New York. And he actually completely then disappeared. He basically disappeared as in he deleted his LinkedIn profile. Completely wiped it clean.
That's well.
Yeah.
Did you have a question there?
Hey there. I think when we were talking about fraud, it's also bias is the other one that's emerging with legal. What we've done, I'm at eBay, and what we had done is we work with our with our CISO, with legal, and we kind of have a tripod with people to make sure that we're assessing the models. And we're seeing a ton of vendors emerge in this space, like Warden, Orca, DLA Piper, Babel, et cetera. I think that's the other thing that we need to make sure that as we have the best of intentions to either increase quality or reduce bias, ironically, or velocity, that we can unintentionally be exposing ourselves. And one of the conferences I went to, which was hosted by HiredScore, or Amanda from Workday would know, they brought in Keith Sonderling, the ex-commissioner of the EEOC, and he was telling us all, saying, while you're all meeting thinking about how you're going to implement AI, there is conferences of lawyers that are meeting and actually talking about the different models and the features and the efficacy or the exposure they have, and then sharing with each other who's exposed. I tracked down one of these attorneys, similar to you, and asked, where would there be risk? And the person asked me and said, are you leveraging Eightfold in any capacity? Now, I think this was to protect me and also to potentially mine from me if I was exposed. And I said, no. And he said, just monitor. This was last September, and then January, we saw the lawsuit come down. So I think it just validates that there's a market for those that move too quickly or that don't approach this in a collaborative way internally.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we're seeing most of all is just cheating during the interview, like tests, technical tests, things like that. A lot of concern about whether people are just using AI to cheat or, cheating their tests, their technical tests. So can you talk a little bit about, I'm interested in the legal environment around that, because again, detection for us is a tricky matter. And you've got hiring managers going, I think they were cheating. I think they were using AI. I want to pass on them. And we're trying to navigate those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question and a great issue. I think the key initial legal compliance mechanism would be transparency. So before someone starts taking that test, you want to make sure you have a notice in place that if you have a proctoring software, you can use a proctoring software. There's no problem with that. But you want to be clear that you are going to use a proctoring software. Does it scan your face? Is it looking at you while you're taking the test? There are a lot of different tools out there that do those types of things. But you want to make sure, because some of the vendors don't do the legal check the box pieces of, are we getting consent where we have to? Are we providing notice where we have to? What if a candidate asks to see the record of that assessment of their, that they were allegedly cheating? Can they provide that if requested? So you want to make sure those boxes are in place as well.
And on the technical side, it's something that Zoom is actually very mindful of and something that we're thinking about. Not just in this market, but given our size, we have a large education contingent. You think about that in corporate learning, that ability to proctor and make that a great experience is something that we're thinking in our product teams, and that's, I think, part of the scale of having platforms that are looking at that really benefits, because you benefit from that knowledge that goes cross-industry.
One more.
My question has to do, Josh, I think this is for you, on automated decision-making. So obviously, even leveraging kind of this screen tool of Bright Hire or candidate matching from the various tools, et cetera. Obviously, there is a degree of automated decision-making, even if you're only prioritizing candidates based on this. If you experience a high volume of applications, for instance, and let's say you distill the top 50 to the top, you're consciously making a decision not to look at the other, prior, right? And you may never get to them ultimately if you prioritize them. What's your legal counsel in terms of, how to characterize that? Is that prioritization? Is that segmentation?
You'll have to sign
how do we even say that?
You have to sign an engagement letter first.
I was just trying to get some free legal advice here.
Most lucrative panel ever.
Exactly. But what I will say is, I think your question is exactly where a lot of us are thinking of what is that line. And the framing that the way I would think about it is, how exactly is the tool operating differently than what we've done traditionally, right? Because even if you had a manual process and you had someone, right, and they had 1,000 resumes to review, they're probably not going to take a look at every single one either. So I would think through how different is that from the manual process, and then what arguments, given the specifics of your tool, can you make that this is or is not a decision?
Cool. So Mofo's got a small office on the mezzanine, which will be open after the break. No, I think we're at the end of this panel. I want to say thank you to our panelists, Soups, Brennan, Josh. A really challenging, yes.